man. All right, I call.
Player one call.
I need a diamond. All right.
Oh, you said top.
I have top.
I wouldn't have called you. I said top. I wouldn't.
I'm sorry.
Is Jamie crossing the line with that talk?
Darn right he is.
I'm sorry.
Jamie Gold was untouchable, or at least that's what he wanted everyone to believe. For one fleeting moment in 2006, he was the king of poker, walking away with the biggest payday in World Series of poker history, $12 million, a mountain of cash that cemented his name in the record books. But here's the thing about poker history, it has a way of remembering the real legends and quietly discarding the frauds. His win wasn't just controversial, it was the beginning of a scandal-ridden downfall that the poker world watched unfold like a slow-motion car crash. In the years that followed, the game changed. The real pros adapted, built careers, solidified their legacies. Jamie Gold, he was drowning. Lawsuits, broken promises, poker rooms that quietly turned him away. But his collapse wasn't just about bad luck or poor decisions, it was something deeper, something the poker world had seen before. A grift. A man who sold an image he couldn't live up to, cashing in on a moment that wasn't supposed to last. And now? Well, let's just say there's a reason you don't hear his name in high-stakes games anymore. This is the story of Jamie Gold's rise, his cons, and his ultimate downfall. A story of how the poker world doesn't just expose frauds, it buries them. Jamie Gold wasn't a poker player in the traditional sense. He wasn't grinding cash games for years, studying solver outputs, or learning the nuances of GTO play. He was an agent, a Hollywood talker, someone who knew how to get inside people's heads and make them do exactly what he wanted. And in the chaotic, overstuffed battlefield of the 2006 World Series of Poker Main Event, that skill turned out to be more valuable than anyone could have predicted. This wasn't the poker of old, where seasoned pros battled in smoke-filled rooms, trading bets with a knowing nod. This was the boom era, a wild, unpredictable collision of amateurs, hopefuls, and television cameras. Online poker had exploded, and for the first time, anyone could be a world champion. Over 8,000 players flooded into the main event, most of them fueled by nothing but a dream and a lucky satellite win. And in that chaos, Jamie Gold thrived. From the moment he sat down, he did something most players wouldn't dare. He never shut up.
But it's not as if I'm not also playing well.
You don't have to say that. You're playing well.
I'm saying, it's not like I'm just, there's some people who just get lucky. I mean, I'm also doing okay.
You're playing.
The usual rules of poker, stoicism, unpredictability, careful deception, meant nothing to him. He narrated hands as they happened, goaded his opponents into mistakes, and made absurdly confident reads out loud. And the worst part? He was right a lot. Players folded to him when they had no reason to. They called him when they shouldn't have. He turned every hand into a performance, and somehow, the audience at the table kept buying tickets. But there's something else that made Jamie Gold's run unlike anything before or since. The deck refused to punish him. His strategy, if you could even call it that, was reckless. He played way too many hands. He called off with nothing. He shoved into strong holdings like a man who had no fear of busting. And yet, time and time again, when it should have all gone wrong, something saved him. The right card, the right misread from his opponent, the exact moment of hesitation that let him escape disaster. It wasn't just a heater, it was one of the most statistically improbable tournament runs in poker history. If the game had evened out, if variance had caught up to him, he would have been just another deep run casualty, a forgotten name on the payout sheet. But this tournament was different. Every time he made a move that should have backfired, the universe bailed him out. By the time he reached the final table, he wasn't just winning, he was drowning the competition. He had the biggest chip lead in main event history, more than enough ammunition to bulldoze his way to the title. And for the casual audience, he looked unstoppable. But the pros watching at home saw something else entirely. They saw a player who was getting away with murder, running a strategy that could never work long term. A player who wasn't actually playing poker, he was playing people, and for this one ridiculous perfect moment, it was working. That moment wouldn't last. But for now, Jamie Gold stood on top of the poker world, completely unaware that his downfall had already begun. Jamie Gold won the biggest prize in poker history, but the moment his name was etched onto that trophy, the fairy tale started falling apart. The celebrations were short-lived. Less than a month after his victory, Gold found himself in the middle of a legal battle that would overshadow everything. Enter Bruce Crispin Leeser, a TV producer and Gold's supposed business partner. Before the tournament, Gold had allegedly struck a deal. Liza would help secure player sponsorships, and in return, they'd split any winnings 50-50. Simple enough, except when Gold actually won, he conveniently forgot about the second half of that equation. $12 million, $6 million of which, if Liza's story was true, wasn't Gold's to keep. What followed was a legal mess that dragged on for months. Liza had voicemails, text messages, and witnesses, all pointing to an agreement that Gold now refused to acknowledge. The poker world watched as the reigning champion, who had barely had time to cash his check, was already fighting to hold on to it. Gold, never one to stay quiet, did what he always did. He talked a lot. He insisted there was a misunderstanding, that things weren't as clear-cut as Liza claimed, that the truth was complicated. But as the case gained traction, the poker community started seeing a different story unfold. This wasn't a champion protecting his hard-earned winnings. This was a guy who had talked his way into a fortune and was now trying to talk his way out of paying his debts. And then came the other problem. Now that the dust had settled, people started taking a closer look at how Jamie Gold had actually won. To the casual poker fan, he looked like a genius, bluffing with confidence, getting players to fold monsters, playing the psychological game better than anyone. But the pros saw something else. They saw a guy who ran absurdly hot for an entire tournament, who played loose, reckless poker that should have backfired at any moment but never did. And now that the heater was over, the truth was becoming painfully obvious. Jamie Gold wasn't some next level strategist. He was just a guy who talked a lot and caught the cards when he needed them. His first post-main event appearances were a disaster. In cash games and televised events, he was exposed. The same relentless table talk that had worked so well in a field full of nervous amateurs fell flat against actual killers. The moment the cards stopped cooperating, he was just another guy throwing chips into the void. The industry turned on him fast. Pros dismissed his win as a statistical anomaly. Analysts pointed out his constant mistakes, his inability to adapt. Gold had the audacity to say he wasn't really trying in these games, as if that would somehow fix his reputation. But the damage was already done. Jamie Gold had spent years mastering the art of persuasion, convincing people to believe in whatever reality he was selling them. But poker, at its core, is a game of truth. You can bluff for a while, you can manipulate perception, but eventually, the cards turn cold, and reality doesn't care what story you're trying to tell. And for Jamie Gold, reality was about to hit hard. Jamie should have been a legend. Winning the biggest main event in history put him in an elite club alongside Doyle Brunson, Johnny Chan, and Phil Hellmuth. But instead of using that victory as a springboard to establish himself as a real force in the game, he pivoted away from high-stakes competition, away from proving he belonged, and straight into business deals, sponsorships, and branding plays. The problem? His name didn't carry the weight he thought it did. While other main event winners used their titles to build real poker careers, Gold leaned into the celebrity of it all. He became the guy who would show up to corporate poker events, shake hands, pose for pictures, and coach wealthy amateurs who wanted to say they played with a world champion. There was just one problem: nobody in the actual poker world respected his game. By the late 2000s, Gold was still trying to monetize his title, but the poker boom was shifting. The new generation, players like Tom Dwan, Jason Mercier, and Phil Galfond, were refining the game, introducing a new level of precision and strategy. Gold's reliance on table talk and relentless aggression didn't work anymore, and he wasn't adapting. Gold tried to stay relevant, but by the mid-2010s, his appearances in poker had dwindled. He wasn't playing high-stakes cash games. He wasn't making deep runs in major tournaments. He wasn't even a controversial figure anymore. He was just forgotten. Today, Jamie Gold is still around. He still plays in charity events, still makes the occasional poker appearance, and still carries the title of world champion. But the poker world has long since written him off. He wasn't a great strategist. He wasn't a lasting force in the game. He was a guy who got hot for 2 weeks, won the biggest tournament in history, and spent the next decade proving why it would never happen again. Because in poker, one win doesn't make you a legend, and for Jamie Gold, one win was all he ever had. Jamie Gold was never the worst main event champion. There have been lesser players, weaker final tables, and winners who disappeared even faster than he did. But when people look back at his victory, they don't see a legendary moment in poker history. They see a fluke. A loud, brash, questionably ethical player who ran absurdly hot. The contrast between Jamie Gold and true poker legends is staggering. When Phil Hellmuth won the main event in the 1980s, he spent the next 4 decades proving he belonged. When Daniel Negreanu became a poker superstar, he adapted, studied, and stayed at the top. When Chris Moneymaker ignited the poker boom, he leaned into his role as the everyman who changed the game forever. Gold? He let poker slip through his fingers. He had all the leverage in the world to become a real force in the game, to refine his skills, to prove his doubters wrong. Poker moves on quickly. One-hit wonders don't get second chances, and when the game left Jamie Gold behind, he didn't chase after it. Because in poker, one win doesn't define you, what you do after does. If you thought Jamie Gold's story was wild, wait until you hear about the dark side of poker, where drugs, alcohol, and addiction have destroyed careers just as quickly as bad bankroll management. Click here to watch the crazy effects of substance abuse in poker.